This is Digital Marketing Depot broadcasting live. I'm Karen Burka, your webcast producer. Thank you for joining us today for Call Tracking and Analytics 101, Tactics to Improve Online-Offline Channel Efficiency. We are very pleased to welcome Michael Boland, Chief Analyst and Vice President of Content at BIA Kelsey, and Ross Kaplan-Wynn, Search Engine Marketing Manager at Top Level Management. Before I turn things over to our speakers, I want to tell all of you a couple of things. If you need some help or have a question for our speakers, just use the Ask a Question box and we will do our best to help you. If you want to tell a friend, check out our sponsor CallRail or Digital Marketing Depot. There are some widgets at the bottom of your screen. Just click on them and they will take you where you want to go. The hashtag for today is DMDWC. We are going to hear a lot of great content today, so I wanted to let you know we are recording this broadcast and we will make it available for viewing on demand this afternoon. I'll send an email when it's ready, or you can check our website, www.digitalmarketingdepot.com. All right, with that business taken care of, let me make some formal introductions. Michael Boland is Chief Analyst and Vice President of Content for BIA Kelsey, where he covers online and mobile media. Mike is a frequent speaker at top industry conferences, such as BIA Kelsey events, Search Engine Strategies, Ad Tech, and Where. He has authored in-depth reports on the changing local media landscape, including online video, social networking, and mobile. He also contributes regularly to highly read online news sources, such as Business Insider and the Huffington Post. Ross Kaplan-Wynn is a Search Engine Marketing Manager at Top Level Management, a full-service firm supporting and improving companies that franchise their businesses. Since 2008, Ross has worked with companies in various industries to help them grow through the use of online marketing. By learning the latest in online marketing technology and techniques, Ross strives to improve businesses in all areas of online marketing, whether it's sales, lead generation, or customer awareness. Now, audience, you can see complete bios for our speakers on the left-hand side of your console. If you have questions for our industry experts, please make good use of that Ask a Question box. I'll get to as many of those questions live after the formal presentation. So with that, I will turn the webcast over to our first speaker, Mike Boland. Mike, there's your first slide.
Thank you, Karen. So as Karen mentioned, I'm Mike Boland. I'm Chief Analyst with BIA Kelsey. And before we begin, just a few quick words about me and BIA Kelsey to set some context. So I'm a 10-year industry analyst and former journalist. I cover mobile and social primarily, and especially angled towards BIA Kelsey's core coverage, which is all things local, so location-targeted media and content and advertising. And the way that plays out is through lots of consulting and conferences and lots of content. So, for example, I wrote a report on call commerce about 18 months ago, which you can see here, and I'm actually currently working on a refresh of that paper. So this topic today is very top of mind for me. And as we're going to be discussing today, it's really all about how phone calls are becoming a more valuable currency in digital marketing. And the name of the game is really driving, tracking, analyzing, and optimizing inbound phone leads. So the best place to start when diving into that topic of call commerce is consumer usage. So let's get right into it. So the underlying driver for a lot of the things that we're going to be going over today is mobile usage and how that's driving call volume. So currently smartphone penetration in the US is about 79% and quickly growing. And the majority of searches are happening on mobile devices according to Google. Now importantly, about half of those searches have intent to find something to do or to buy or to see or to eat in one's immediate vicinity. And this is a key foundational point that's going to underlie a lot of the things we'll be discussing today. And call commerce isn't always in a local context, but often it is. Now, drilling down a bit further, I put together a mobile ad revenue forecast about twice per year, which has turned out to be pretty accurate in the last 7 years I've been doing it. And these are the figures that we just released about 4 or 5 months ago. And they project mobile ad revenues in the U.S. to go from $22.7 billion in 2015 to almost $62.2 billion by 2020. Now, importantly, the share of that total that's attributed to location-targeted mobile ads is about 37% growing to about 43% by 2020. And that has a lot to do with the figures we saw on the previous slide, that mobile usage is skewing towards local intent, and then there's lots of other factors we measure. So to unpack that a bit further and go one level deeper, one of the ways we subdivide that ad spend is by format. And the clear takeaway here is that search is the leading form of mobile advertising and will continue to grow throughout the forecast period. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that, including higher premiums and ad rates when compared to things like traditional display ads, and higher performance due to search's intent-driven use case. But really the reason I mention this and what it really leads up to is the implication for our main topic today of the growth of phone calls as a business lead form. Because call volumes to businesses very much correlate to mobile search and are often driven from mobile search, as it's a natural handoff from one to the other. So the takeaway here is really that the prevalence of mobile search in this forecast is a leading indicator of the growth of call commerce. Now, to kind of back up that premise that mobile search and phone calls have that kind of correlation, here's some data from Google that show that 3 out of 4 mobile searches trigger additional actions and conversions. And those actions are things like visiting a store, making a purchase, or making phone calls. And these are all very highly valued actions from the perspective of advertisers and businesses that are looking for tangible return on their ad spend. So taking that a step further, these actions aren't just happening at high volumes, but they're also happening quickly. So on this same slide, you'll see that 55% of purchase-related conversions are happening within 1 hour from the initial search. So that tells me that mobile users are indeed lower funnel, high intent consumers. They're literally an hour away from a conversion in many cases, and therefore the opportunity to influence buying decisions is high, and it's actually much higher than any other media that we analyze. So what this all tells me is that all signs point to very compelling reasons to capture that user intent. The intent is there, clearly. So publishers and advertisers who aren't providing optimized content or ads that include actionable cues, such as call buttons, for users to take action are missing a large opportunity. So the question is, what are those kind of calls to action? There are lots of them, and they're really growing in prevalence as app developers and publishers and advertisers are catching on to these usage realities that mobile consumers are ready to transact. And I'm going to go over in just a minute some examples of those types of calls to action. But first, we want to pause here for a quick poll question that relates. So I'll pass it back to you, Karen.
Thanks, Mike. All right, audience, we're going to jump right in here and see what your knowledge level is before Mike dives a little deeper into what all that call intent means. So our first question for you today is, how familiar are you with call tracking? And we've got 4 choices. You can choose from we use it and are seeing a return on our investment. We use it but aren't seeing any real benefit. We're somewhat familiar with it and researching call tracking tools, or you're not very familiar with it but want to learn more, and that would certainly explain why you've joined us here today. So while we give you a minute to think about your response, I will just remind everyone that we will have a recording of this presentation available later on this afternoon on our website, and you can view it on demand at your convenience. I'll be sending out an email blast later today when the on-demand version is ready. So let's take a look and see what our poll results are. All right, so we've got over 40% saying they're already using call tracking and are seeing a return on our investment, which, Mike, is a good sign. We've got a lot of people at the top and then almost 25% at the bottom saying not familiar, and that's probably why they're here today.
Excellent. I think that's certainly telling of the advanced nature of this audience that, 40, almost half, are already doing it. But I think the key point is not just doing it, but seeing an ROI. So that's encouraging to see. It's also good to see the level of aptitude of this audience that isn't necessarily beginner level. So I think that kind of moving next into what I've talked about relates to that, in that some people might already be doing a lot of call tracking and analytics, but the art itself is evolving so quickly. So there are other places to kind of grow into. So before the poll, I ended by talking about how all signs point to very compelling reasons to capture that high user intent. And really the best way that's done is by call to action buttons. And the most prevalent place we've seen this so far is in search, but it's certainly growing into other areas like social. But also importantly, this all aligns with another trend we're seeing in mobile, which is what I like to call the rise of the buy buttons. So we're seeing a proliferation of action buttons. And one way this has played out is the buy button in feed-based social media like Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest, Bible pins, Twitter. And it seems like everyone has a buy button now. But we're also seeing things like buttons to message a business or schedule an appointment or book a reservation. So there's a lot of ways this trend is playing out. But I'd like to zero in on one of the highest value functions on this list, which is, of course, click to call, our topic today. And that comes down to the simple reality that buy buttons, though they're very popular lately, only address e-commerce. The much larger opportunity is in driving offline commerce. And we've been saying for years that e-commerce only represents about 7% of U.S. consumer spending. The rest is all offline. So based on that, my prediction is that we're going to see these action buttons continue to grow, but they're going to lean more towards driving offline actions, not just, buy something in an e-commerce context. And that will include phone calls. And we're already seeing this with Facebook's call button, which you can see there to the right. And I'll spend some time talking more about that in a minute. But there are also long-standing call buttons, which many of you are probably already using, or at least that 40% of you might already be using, which are things like Google's local extensions that plant this type of activity within search. But the point here is it's growing beyond search to some areas that you might not have explored yet. Moving on, it's also important to note that the increased prevalence of these buttons is going to align with another set of trends that are causing call volumes to grow. And this steps back and looks at some just kind of underlying realities that are causing this to be such a large opportunity in terms of growth of volume of calls. So for one, I alluded to this earlier, there's the simple fact that the smartphone bolts a search and discover device with a phone, with a native dialer and a voice input. So on a hardware level, it makes a lot of sense, and it's a natural handoff from mobile engagement to phone call. But going even deeper, it also comes down to more of a scientific angle, which is that humans have a biological imperative to communicate by voice. And that applies to most human interactions, but especially commerce because of its level of complexity in certain cases. And it's kind of ironic, despite the automation and e-commerce of the digital era, the complexity of many of these transactions still require voice communication and talking to another human. And this isn't going away anytime soon. And not only are calls resulting, but they're high value, high intent calls from transaction-ready consumers. And it's especially true in high consideration and complex purchases like autos or financial services or healthcare. And these are areas where you really need to talk to a person, and not just for kind of social reasons, but for sheer practicality. And this is an important point because the value of leads in these high ticket categories like autos is so high, so it's a ripe area for monetization. And as I alluded to earlier, it's also taking over many different formats and mobile channels as consumers' points of engagement in mobile are themselves rapidly expanding and broadening. So for example, click to call, as I mentioned, is often thought of in a search context, but it's not just search. The opportunity really lives in many places, and that includes the growing number of places phone numbers are showing up in mobile channels. And this ties closely to the trend I mentioned earlier of just everything becoming more actionable. So that includes display ads, which are getting increasingly dynamic with action buttons, call links. It also includes landing pages, such as your mobile website or directory apps like YP and Yelp and Foursquare and others. It also includes social apps, of course. I mentioned that, which is actually the fastest growing category that's driving calls to businesses. So let's drill down a little bit more on that. So we're seeing lots of ways that social media is trying to monetize natively, and that increasingly includes the in-feed ad units and native ads such as Facebook newsfeed ads. Now that's nothing new, but what is new is that these native ad units are increasingly getting actionable with the buttons to engage with businesses, not just kind of peer-to-peer interactions, but to actually interact with businesses and allow businesses to interact conversely with their local customers. And that gets back to the buy buttons I discussed. But for the reasons I mentioned, we're also going to see the growth in buttons to facilitate that offline commerce, and the call button is certainly going to be one of them. And we're already seeing traction there. So Twitter has experimented with a click-to-call button that gives advertisers tools to let their customers call them directly from promoted tweets. Facebook integrated call buttons within the newsfeed, as we went over before, and you can see more of that on this screen. So I really expect to see a lot more of this type of thing in the coming weeks and months. Now, to kind of quantify some of these trends with some call volume and conversion data we're seeing, here are some more BIA-Kelsey forecast data showing mobile call volume. So the top line finding here is that calls driven to businesses from all mobile content formats total about 93 billion this year, growing to about 160 billion by 2019. And this includes both mobile app and mobile web. So search is the clear winner here in terms of call volume, and that's really a function of its intent-based nature, which tends to drive a lot of calls, as I mentioned earlier. And it's also the intuitive handoff from search to call that's being driven by lots of tools like call extensions in search results and some of the other things I went over. Now, you can also see how other mobile formats here are trending as call drivers. And I won't go into all of them right now, but one notable finding is that social media is the smallest but fastest growing format from which calls will be generated. And that results from, the rise of native social ads and things like call buttons and a lot of the things on the previous slide. But interestingly, that growth will mostly come at the expense of traditional display, such as banners, where we're seeing relatively flat growth, at least in terms of generating phone calls. So one of the key takeaways here is that these calls are happening either way. All of the usage trends and mobile realities and things we went over are going to send these massive volumes of calls to businesses. So really the only question is how that opportunity is captured. And it's a question of what marketers do to get ready for all those incoming calls and treat it as an opportunity to get better data and a better sense of ROI and to make better decisions. So that's all about driving the calls, channeling them to the right places, tracking, analyzing those calls, and then kind of iterating and optimizing marketing campaigns accordingly and on an ongoing basis. And that's all done usually through software platforms provided by call analytics providers. Now, it's also important to note, kind of winding down here, that this all kind of happens on two levels. So the first main area is marketing. And in that sense, call analytics is a play towards driving high-quality leads through the strategic placement of click-to-call links and getting a better sense of ROI and campaign attribution. And that, in turn, drives more informed marketing decisions on an ongoing basis. Now, the second level, which we didn't go over as much today, but I think it's important, is service and support. So outside of a marketing context, call analytics can really intelligently filter and route calls more effectively so that callers get to the right reps faster and preserve revenue-generating opportunities and other important metrics like customer satisfaction and hold times and service agents, general effectiveness and productivity, and training and quality control, things like that. So winding down, I have a few slides here about how this applies to marketers. So in light of some of the interesting trends in technology that I'm tracking, marketers are very much being empowered to implement a lot of the technologies we're talking about today. So the first trend here is that marketing departments are becoming more self-sufficient and less reliant upon the IT department for purchasing and managing software platforms. And this is great because in the past, being under the jurisdiction of the IT department has been a barrier to adoption of a lot of marketing technologies. So this trend essentially becomes very empowering for those in a marketing role to be more effective and to budget and implement many of the things we're talking about today. And that goes back to a quote you may have heard, which is, by 2017, CMOs will spend more on IT than their counterpart CIOs. So that really serves to further frame the opportunity in that not only do all of these great tools exist for call tracking and analytics, but the ability for marketers to actually implement them will continue to be empowered through political capital and budget. Now, the second trend here, before I conclude, really works towards that same end with the evolution and dynamics of the software world, and specifically the lowered barriers to robust platform integration. So, for example, the rise of cloud-based software platforms and SaaS service models allow marketers to manage and run these platforms without the requirement for lots of technological knowledge and capital investment and on-site servers. So trend one was more kind of political and budgetary. Trend two is more technical, but the collective result is lots more empowerment for marketers to do the things we're talking about today. So for any marketers on this call, the moral of the story is that if you haven't already felt some of the benefits, these are just two trends that could improve your ability to have a real near-term impact with call analytics. So I will put a period there. I hope this has been valuable in terms of the what and the why. What is call commerce and why should you be paying attention to it? Both validating those who are already working with it, the 40% of you, and also showing the rest of you that there's a lot there to pay attention to. So hopefully that tees up the discussion of the how, which Ross will go over in a bit. But first, I believe we have another poll, so I will pass it back to you, Karen.
Thanks, Mike. Wow, that was a lot of great information and kind of got everybody's minds thinking, I think, of here's all the potential benefits, especially for those who are already using call tracking. Maybe you open their minds to a new benefit or a new way their company could use them, and opened a lot of people's eyes to who are investigating tools. So here's our question for you, audience. Why would you implement call tracking? What brings you here today? What are you looking to do at your company? Are you primarily interested in tracking online campaigns? Are you primarily interested in tracking offline campaigns? Perhaps you want to see the relationship between the two, so you want to track both online and offline campaigns. Or another use case is to record phone calls to customer service sales and staff. And, that gives good insight into what callers are interested in, and it also gives good evaluation tools for your customer service and sales staff. So while you think about that for a few seconds, I'll remind everyone that both Mike and Ross are going to be here to answer questions at the end of our presentation. So make good use of that Ask a Question box for any questions you have. I'll be sure to get to as many of them as we have time for. So let's see what the results say before I pass it over to Ross Kaplan-Wynn, who's going to give us more, as Mike said, of the hows and some good case studies and actionable information. So Ross, here we go. 66% of our audience wants to track both online and offline campaigns, which is probably consistent with what you usually hear and see, right?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Karen. And actually, I'm going to kind of talk about how you can track both online and offline campaigns. So I guess this aligns nicely with what I'm going to be going into. So
great. Go ahead. I'm going to push out your first slide there. Go ahead.
Yeah, to begin, we know that businesses not only need phone calls, but as Mike mentioned, they're already getting billions of calls every year, and that number is only going to increase. But the problem is, are we able to track where these calls are coming from? People are getting calls through radio, direct TV, or direct mail, PPC, SEO, lots of different marketing channels that we are driving, but we're not able. How do we know which marketing channels are working? For one, Google Analytics doesn't report on phone calls out of the box, and customers commonly misreport where they hear about your business. I audit hundreds of calls, and many times they'll say they heard about you on the radio, but really they came through PPC. And sure, it might be a combination of those things, but wouldn't it be nice to know with a little more certainty where they're hearing about your business and getting in touch? So we'll run through some of the call tracking benefits and features real quick. DNI stands for Dynamic Number Insertion, and this is where the phone number on your website will automatically switch based on the marketing channel that someone comes from online. Email notifications, offline marketing channels, you're able to use a unique phone number for each of those. And then timeline is kind of a cool feature where you are able to see where people go on your website before and after a call. So let's say someone lands on one of your service landing pages, but then decides to go to your About page and then your contact page before calling. You're able to kind of see that entire visitor journey. Some other features are call scheduling, and this allows you to, for instance, have one phone ring during business hours and then another phone ring after hours. Simulcall allows you to ring multiple phones at once, and attribution just allows you to see how all your marketing channels work together to ultimately lead towards that lead or sale. So we're going to run through a couple scenarios here. The first being that you're not currently tracking calls, which you definitely should be. So I recommend, if you're not currently tracking calls, definitely get it set up today for your business or your clients' businesses. And if you're wondering how to get started, it's really as simple as signing up for a call tracking provider and installing a call tracking script. And if this looks like another language to you, you really can just send it to your developer and it'll be installed in about 3 minutes, kind of just like Google Analytics. And the great thing is that after you have this installed, you're able to manage everything else through the software. So we're going to run through a couple kind of buckets of where you can use call tracking. The first being local SEO, and then click to call, as Mike talked about quite a bit, and then your various offline marketing channels. So with local SEO, NAP consistency, and NAP stands for name, address, and phone number. It's one of the most important ranking factors for local SEO, and it's important that you have that same information across all your local business listings. And these are things like Yelp, Google My Business, Bing, Angie's List, YP.com. And as you can see here, the great thing is that you can actually keep your same phone number that you have for your business, and you can transfer or port your phone number to a call tracking provider to gain some of the benefits of call tracking. And the second bucket we'll talk about is mobile click to call. And this is where you can call directly from an ad. And one of the great benefits of this is that you can actually skip the business's landing page. And for many small businesses, they're still not optimized for a mobile browsing or mobile converting experience. So this is actually a big benefit to be able to get someone on the phone right away. And they don't have to go through, kind of reduces friction. They don't have to go through a process of clicking an ad and then filling out a form and then maybe getting a call back. In many cases, businesses don't even respond to those lead forms, I've found out. And another nice benefit versus Google, they have their own kind of integrated call tracking features, but being able to record calls really keeps everyone accountable, allows you to hear objections and then kind of improve your sales or customer service process. And then reporting, just having a nice centralized dashboard is always a great place, or great feature as well. So the third kind of bucket is your various offline marketing channels. And these are things like direct mail, yard signs, TV, radio, and recently one of our clients, we installed call tracking numbers on company vehicles so that we could see how many calls they're getting through them. And you might think it's a pretty low number, but I actually heard that Dish Network was getting up to 10% of their calls through their company vehicles. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out for us. And the second scenario we'll run through is that maybe you're currently tracking phone calls, but you're not tracking calls down to the keyword level. And this is really important for a PPC campaign. So I actually had the same problem for one of my clients. We could see that at least 50% of the leads they were getting through PPC were phone calls versus web forms. And in some campaigns and some locations, that number is skewed all the way up to 70% calls versus forms. But the problem is that if you don't track calls to the keyword level, you're not able to integrate all that data back into AdWords. And then you're not able to further optimize by things like time of day, day of week, mobile versus desktop, and all kind of those different segments. So it's difficult to, if not impossible, to optimize AdWords on click-through rate alone. So clearly the solution was to implement keyword level call tracking so we could see exactly what was driving that 50% or greater of leads that were coming in over the phone. So to set this up, it's just a few steps. First is to create a keyword tracking pool. And this is basically a group of phone numbers that rotate based on the active user that visits your site from PPC. So for instance, one user might come in through a door repair keyword and ad, and they'll get one phone number. And then someone else might come in through a window repair keyword and ad. They'll get a separate phone number. And this will all be tracked kind of behind the scenes back into AdWords. The next step is to integrate your call tracking provider into Google Analytics. And what this does is create call events, which you can then create your conversions or goals in analytics based on. And it's really as simple as just typing phone and clicking save, which then allows you to hop over into AdWords and import those newly created goals. So the results from this were that cost per lead was 3 times lower initially, and that was without a lot of that additional optimization that I was able to do as the data came in. Another benefit was that for many or most businesses, phone calls are actually worth more than people filling out a form, and this is because you're less likely to lose them to competitors. You don't have to worry about people not calling back, like I mentioned previously. And so we are able to assign a higher value to phone calls and then further optimize based on those kind of new lead values that we could then report on. So another benefit to final benefit to call tracking here is that we could provide more value to our clients. We could provide them with a nice reporting dashboard. They would get email notifications as soon as they hung up that would say a call was from PPC or SEO. So we'd continually kind of reinforce that our marketing efforts were working. And then whisper messages, our little voice that as soon as someone answers the phone, it would say call from PPC or call from SEO to continue to kind of reinforce our marketing efforts. So I am going to hand things back to Karen now.
Great. Thanks,
thank you.
Ross. That was some great examples, audience, and we definitely have generated some questions here. So I'm going to let us get right to it because clearly there's a lot of tactical information that's very important in all this. So let me put our first question up there for you. All right. So and I'm sure you both will have something to contribute to this question in particular. In a multi-device, multi-channel, multi-touch world, what attribution models deserve attention, such as last call, first call, all calls? So, Ross, you just mentioned attribution on a couple of slides back. I'm sure that's an important thing to think about when you're looking at where calls fit in on the journey, right?
Yeah, definitely. And for, let's just say for local SEO and specifically, I like to track first-time callers, so that way we're not reporting on people who are calling back for questions or further support. As far as the different marketing channels, I think that's going to be difficult and kind of need to look at your own data to figure that out.
Yeah, I'll add attribution, of course, very important, and for the reason mentioned in the question, which is that we have such a multi-screen world. So relying just on last-click attribution sometimes misses out on perhaps something further upstream influenced that call happening and not necessarily just the last thing they did. So lots of kind of traditional ways that calls have been attributed to specific ad groups or specific campaigns, and the most basic one is through specific call tracking numbers, where that number can determine which campaign or ad group or other kind of ways that the call happened. And even we're getting more advanced these days by working with, I've talked to a few different companies in the industry that are trying to do things such as tie a phone call back to a previous ad exposure to a display ad. Now, of course, that gets a lot more complicated because there's not necessarily a discernible digital path between those two things. But there's extrapolation methodologies which can essentially link someone's phone number to different things like tracking information of display ads they may have seen in other channels. And sometimes that's used by kind of pulling together data sets from third parties like Newstar and others. Now, it's an extrapolation methodology, so sometimes that's used in ways that will do A/B testing or overall kind of lifts in calls based on areas where ads were run. So it's not an exact science yet, but we're starting to get closer to that cross-channel attribution.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Here's another question associated with SEO, which I know can be a real concern sometimes when it comes to click-to-call. Ross, maybe you want to start us off. Can you address some of the SEO issues associated with having multiple phone numbers?
Yeah, like I kind of touched on, you really want to keep the same phone number for all your local business listings, your maps listings, and you're able to do that. And as far as numbers that switch kind of dynamically, Google will see your site based on your actual phone number, and so that'll actually happen kind of after or when a real user visits. So I haven't run into any real SEO issues with tracking numbers.
Nothing more to add to that. I completely agree that the routing and the switching happens on the back end and in terms of what Google sees. But I think it's an important question because exactly what Ross said earlier about the importance of having consistent map information throughout the basic kind of structured data in the listing. But what the user sees and what Google sees in terms of any SEO rankings, I believe, is just the number that's shown.
All right, great. Here comes our next one. Do click-to-call ads that do not have a landing page incorporate a quality score? And that's, of course, a reference to Google. Which of you wants to handle that first?
I'm wondering the same thing.
I'm not sure I know the answer, but what I'll say is that I know that Google offers a call-only type of campaign. And the fact that they offer that, meaning you don't have to have a website where clicks will go, suggests that Google is certainly at least thinking about calls only and is friendly to campaigns that want to essentially launch phone calls instead of clicks to landing pages.
Yeah, and I'll add to that definitely. The quality score calculation tends to be upwards of 70% of that calculation is from click-through rate. So landing page is one of the kind of minor factors as far as quality score goes. So I don't think it would have a major impact either way.
Okay, great. Mike, I think you probably want to take first stab at this because it seems to refer to maybe one of your slides. What is the market share of phone call conversions relative to the rest of the conversions or maybe your conversions? I guess they're asking, the calls come in, but is there some statistics on how they actually convert?
I believe there are. I don't think I have those in front of me. I can say that I showed the different formats of call volumes and the relative shares of how many calls are being generated. Now, this question gets to more of a qualitative drill down of, which one of those are the best. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I see that among all of those, search converts the best in terms of, quality calls coming through. And after that, it's kind of a fragmented pack of quality scores that are, somewhat somewhat similar when you compare things like social landing pages and display ads. And that's simply because in most of those mediums, the intent, the actual buying intent tends to be a bit lower because search is very pull-based and someone is raising their hand and looking for something. We see those conversion rates higher. I do have those numbers somewhere and can follow up, after the webinar in terms of any kind of post-event engagement we have in answering questions, because I know that those numbers do exist.
Yeah, and I can add to that if it kind of relates to as it relates to my case study that I presented. It was a pretty 50-50 split as far as kind of initial contact, forums versus people calling the company. But it really just depends by location, by market, even within the same company. People kind of just prefer one thing over another.
There's also another statistic I'll mention that is somewhat related to the question, which is that across all channels, only 19% of inbound calls to businesses we've measured are what can be considered quality calls. So that weeds out all the things such as either a wrong number or perhaps a solicitor or someone asking, like a recruiter, someone just calling for other reasons. Only 19% of calls are quote-unquote good calls. And what the real takeaway in that number is that it really begs for good call analytics to separate the good calls from the bad calls. And because businesses and merchants of all sizes, their time is so valuable, to be able to focus in on just the good calls is a very important point. So it really just it compels smart call analytics, because most calls, 81%, are not good calls. So it really compels good smart systems to separate the good from the bad.
Great. Here's a more strategic question that I think both of you probably can contribute to. Mike, why don't you take first pass at this? What are the biggest costs and challenges with running successful call tracking and analytics?
Yeah, that's a good question. One traditional cost has always been, operating call analytics at scale when tracking and analyzing, mass quantities of calls. Ross, you mentioned earlier that you audited thousands of calls. That's a great example. So sometimes in lead scoring, for example, human intervention is required to literally listen to thousands of calls and score them to be able to attribute ROI of the marketing campaign that drove those calls. So what we're starting to see, though, interestingly, is that there's advancement in things like speech-to-text processing, which is something that learns over time, and machine learning. The latter is particularly interesting, I think, because it can benchmark thousands of granular attributes of what makes a quote-unquote good call or good phone lead. And that's everything from call length to keyword to caller inflection or the ratio of customer talking to rep talking, and all kinds of other things that can be developed through machine learning and then applied to incoming calls to score leads on an ongoing basis. And I think that's something to look forward to as it continues to develop in terms of reducing that cost structure associated with manual call monitoring, but I don't think we're there yet. And Ross, you probably have more to say on that as being someone who has actually monitored a lot of calls.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree that is kind of the biggest cost is just human resource and time. And then I found over time that I would have to train people to listen to their calls and teach them how to assign proper tags. But I would say that's definitely the biggest challenge. Setting up is really easy. Once that's done, it's kind of smooth sailing. So.
Okay, great. Ross, this was, I guess somebody wanted you to clarify something that was just said, that you can import a third-party call tracking into Google Analytics, not just the Google forwarding number. Can you just clarify that, please?
Yes, that's correct. And you can actually choose the length or duration of call you want to import into Analytics as well. Actually, I forgot to mention that. So if you want, let's say you usually need a 60-second or 2-minute call before that's considered qualified. You can only import calls over that duration.
Okay. Let's get to our next question. Mike, maybe you start us off on this one. What are some simple things that can be done to get started with call commerce? So I guess this can be very daunting for someone who's new or just getting started.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think eventually the holy grail is you want to get to advanced call analytics using, a call analytics provider. But I think before that point, there's some kind of low-hanging fruit that we alluded to today that, you can start to experiment with to kind of develop an education in call analytics. So some of those simply include, Google's call extensions in AdWords. You can also get started pretty easily with Facebook's call button that I mentioned earlier. Facebook is really on a major campaign right now to get businesses of all sizes to use it as a presence tool, and even to the point of substituting their website. I'm not sure they're going to be very successful in that kind of at a mass scale, but I think that they are pushing very hard to make things super simple for businesses to use Facebook as a tool to not only have a presence but also kind of run their businesses and facilitate leads. So they've made that very simple. So that's something that I think can be done to for beginners to start to kind of experiment with driving calls. And I think one other thing a lot of people don't know about, I mentioned it earlier, is the call-only ad unit, which lets you essentially drive just calls and not clicks. Now, that might not make sense for your business, or it might, but I think the point is that it's good to develop an education about the available tools and options and then decide how that best applies to your business goals or your particular vertical. But there are a lot of those kind of low-hanging fruit options just to kind of get that ball rolling.
Ross, did you want to add anything?
Sure, I'll add to that. I think for like the local SEO example, just porting your phone number into a call tracking provider, and then you don't actually even need to run any marketing campaigns, and you can start, seeing the data come in and play with the interface and just learn how that works. So I think that's another simple way to get started.
Right. All right, we're going to try and take maybe 1-2 more questions. Let's start with this, Ross, maybe for you. We have multiple business locations with several online properties, and customers often visit several of our properties before placing a call. Can call analytics help us map that kind of journey?
Yes, definitely. I think the great thing about using a third-party call tracking provider as opposed to some of the kind of built-in advertising ones is that you're able to track multiple phone numbers, so you can kind of see how they all work together to drive those leads or sales to a business.
Another quick thing related to the question that I think is worth mentioning is that Google allows you to provide your business information for each individual location. So in the context of a multi-location business, so when mobile searches happen, the closest phone number and the closest branch will show up if that's managed correctly. And that might be an obvious statement, but that's something worth mentioning in terms of some of those multi-location businesses, because you want the closest number to show up, not the kind of corporate headquarters or other kind of suboptimal user experiences.
All right, let's try and squeeze in one more before we let everybody go. What is available for tracking non-click-to-call ads, such as from PCs, laptops, tablets, generated clicks in AdWords? How do I track those calls? Or I guess, is it possible to track calls that come in from a phone number in an ad that aren't on a mobile phone where you can just click right on it? Mike, want to take
Definitely.
a shot?
So, go ahead, Ross.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that the dynamic number insertion feature where your phone number on your website will switch to a tracking number automatically when they come from, for instance, SEO or PPC, so you can kind of differentiate between those sort of buckets of marketing channels.
I agree. That's great. Nothing to add.
Good. Wonderful. Well, we've certainly generated a lot of questions, as I thought we would, because we got into a lot of really good actionable information and some great top-line information. And I'm going to wrap it up here. I want to thank Mike and Ross for a very informative and timely presentation, and thank you, audience, for a bunch of great questions. A special thank you to our sponsor, CallRail. You can visit them at www.callrail.com. That's all for our broadcast today. We look forward to seeing you next time right here at Digital Marketing Depot. This is Digital Marketing Depot broadcasting live. I'm Karen Burka, your webcast producer. Thank you for joining us today for Call Tracking and Analytics 101, Tactics to Improve Online-Offline Channel Efficiency. We are very pleased to welcome Michael Boland, Chief Analyst and Vice President of Content at BIA Kelsey, and Ross Kaplan-Wynn, Search Engine Marketing Manager at Top Level Management. Before I turn things over to our speakers, I want to tell all of you a couple of things. If you need some help or have a question for our speakers, just use the Ask a Question box and we will do our best to help you. If you want to tell a friend, check out our sponsor CallRail or Digital Marketing Depot. There are some widgets at the bottom of your screen. Just click on them and they will take you where you want to go. The hashtag for today is DMDWC. We are going to hear a lot of great content today, so I wanted to let you know we are recording this broadcast and we will make it available for viewing on demand this afternoon. I'll send an email when it's ready, or you can check our website, www.digitalmarketingdepot.com. All right, with that business taken care of, let me make some formal introductions. Michael Boland is Chief Analyst and Vice President of Content for BIA Kelsey, where he covers online and mobile media. Mike is a frequent speaker at top industry conferences, such as BIA Kelsey events, Search Engine Strategies, Ad Tech, and Where. He has authored in-depth reports on the changing local media landscape, including online video, social networking, and mobile. He also contributes regularly to highly read online news sources, such as Business Insider and the Huffington Post. Ross Kaplan-Wynn is a Search Engine Marketing Manager at Top Level Management, a full-service firm supporting and improving companies that franchise their businesses. Since 2008, Ross has worked with companies in various industries to help them grow through the use of online marketing. By learning the latest in online marketing technology and techniques, Ross strives to improve businesses in all areas of online marketing, whether it's sales, lead generation, or customer awareness. Now, audience, you can see complete bios for our speakers on the left-hand side of your console. If you have questions for our industry experts, please make good use of that Ask a Question box. I'll get to as many of those questions live after the formal presentation. So with that, I will turn the webcast over to our first speaker, Mike Boland. Mike, there's your first slide.
Thank you, Karen. So as Karen mentioned, I'm Mike Boland. I'm Chief Analyst with BIA Kelsey. And before we begin, just a few quick words about me and BIA Kelsey to set some context. So I'm a 10-year industry analyst and former journalist. I cover mobile and social primarily, and especially angled towards BIA Kelsey's core coverage, which is all things local, so location-targeted media and content and advertising. And the way that plays out is through lots of consulting and conferences and lots of content. So, for example, I wrote a report on call commerce about 18 months ago, which you can see here, and I'm actually currently working on a refresh of that paper. So this topic today is very top of mind for me. And as we're going to be discussing today, it's really all about how phone calls are becoming a more valuable currency in digital marketing. And the name of the game is really driving, tracking, analyzing, and optimizing inbound phone leads. So the best place to start when diving into that topic of call commerce is consumer usage. So let's get right into it. So the underlying driver for a lot of the things that we're going to be going over today is mobile usage and how that's driving call volume. So currently smartphone penetration in the US is about 79% and quickly growing. And the majority of searches are happening on mobile devices according to Google. Now importantly, about half of those searches have intent to find something to do or to buy or to see or to eat in one's immediate vicinity. And this is a key foundational point that's going to underlie a lot of the things we'll be discussing today. And call commerce isn't always in a local context, but often it is. Now drilling down a bit further, I put together a mobile ad revenue forecast about twice per year, which has turned out to be pretty accurate in the last 7 years I've been doing it. And these are the figures that we just released about 4 or 5 months ago. and they project mobile ad revenues in the U.S. to go from $22.7 billion in 2015 to almost $62.2 billion by 2020. Now, importantly, the share of that total that's attributed to location-targeted mobile ads is about 37%, growing to about 43% by 2020. And that has a lot to do with the figures we saw on the previous slide, that mobile usage is skewing towards local intent, and then there's lots of other factors we measure. So to unpack that a bit further and go one level deeper, one of the ways we subdivide that ad spend is by format. And the clear takeaway here is that search is the leading form of mobile advertising and will continue to grow throughout the forecast period. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that, including higher premiums and ad rates when compared to things like traditional display ads, and higher performance due to search's intent-driven use case. But really the reason I mention this and what it really leads up to is the implication for our main topic today of the growth of phone calls as a business lead form. Because call volumes to businesses very much correlate to mobile search and are often driven from mobile search, as it's a natural handoff from one to the other. So the takeaway here is really that the prevalence of mobile search in this forecast is a leading indicator of the growth of call commerce. Now, to kind of back up that premise that mobile search and phone calls have that kind of correlation, here's some data from Google that show that 3 out of 4 mobile searches trigger additional actions and conversions. And those actions are things like visiting a store, making a purchase, or making phone calls. And these are all very highly valued actions from the perspective of advertisers and businesses that are looking for tangible return on their ad spend. So taking that a step further, these actions aren't just happening at high volumes, but they're also happening quickly. So on this same slide, you'll see that 55% of purchase-related conversions are happening within 1 hour from the initial search. So that tells me that mobile users are indeed lower funnel, high intent consumers. They're literally an hour away from a conversion in many cases, and therefore the opportunity to influence buying decisions is high, and it's actually much higher than any other media that we analyze. So what this all tells me is that all signs point to very compelling reasons to capture that user intent. The intent is there, clearly. So publishers and advertisers who aren't